All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we try to take a look at some great theories of everything, ancient and modern, and maybe try to help you figure out how to use these things in your life, how to employ them for your paradigm shifting or your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview. Today is our 544th video we've done on the reciprocal system of theory by Dewey B. Larson. So I at least must think that it's pretty important to do 544 videos on it. And we'll probably do another 50 or so after this one. Mr. Larson was an American engineer who lived in the 20th century. He died back in 1990, but not before he left behind many books on physics and chemistry and astrophysics, and also a book on metaphysics, which includes philosophy and religion, psychology, biology, and he also has 2 books on economics, including the one that we're reading from today, which is called The Road to Permanent Prosperity. And Larson is one of the few scientists to propose a universe based on motion, not matter, not energy, not force, but motion. The universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. So in Larson's system, motion is the sole component of the universe, and motion is the relationship between space and time, which is a reciprocal relationship. All of our scientific quantities are fractions, with space or time as the numerator, time or space as the denominator. Speed, for example, I was running at 10 miles per hour, 10 miles of space in 1 hour of time. That is space over time. Matter, in Larson's formulation, is time to the 3rd power over space to the 3rd power. Energy is simply time over space, or the inverse of speed. And so on. Pressure is time over space to the 4th power. Force is time over space to the 2nd power. Acceleration is space over time to the 2nd power. And so on and so forth. Now, when Larson refers to motion, he's referring specifically to what we call scalar motion. Scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no specific direction. So it is a more generalized kind of motion that you can envision using a balloon that you put dots on with a magic marker. If you blow up the balloon, all the dots are moving away from each other. If you contract the balloon, all the dots are moving toward each other. But they're not moving in any specific direction. Every dot is moving away or toward every other dot. And so every dot is moving in every direction. You can really just say in or out. And the outward motion, Larson refers to that as the progression. And this progression is something that is always occurring. It is omniscient, omnipresent and eternal. It is always occurring everywhere in the universe. Larson calls that the progression, and when it is at 1 unit of space per 1 unit of time, that is the progression of the natural reference system. So that is the natural motion of the universe. And then that inverse motion, the contraction of the balloon, is analogous to gravitation. And so this progression is really like anti-gravity, and it is the motion from which all other motions are derived. You have to reverse that motion before you can start manifesting anything. Now, that progression of the natural reference system, we feel that as completely motionless because it's always there. It's like a fish in water. Fish doesn't know it's in water. We don't know that we're in the progression. And we only notice it when we're out of the progression. And Larson takes these principles and arrives at a theoretical universe, how he believes the universe would operate if his postulates were correct, if that first postulate. And he plugs it in and then writes his books comparing his theoretical universe with the measured universe of, say, the chemists or the astronomers. But here in his book on economics, he's got two books on economics. The other one is called The Road to Full Employment. And we may look at that a little bit later. But in this one, The Road to Permanent Prosperity, he first emphasizes that this is a work of physics. This is a work of science. These formulas that he arrives at and the principles that he arrives at are exact, and they are mathematical, and they're and he criticizes many of the economists for, grinding political, ideological, what he calls sociological axes in their economics work, like, policy, helping the poor, or restraining monopoly capitalism, or putting money into circulation. These are things that Larson says are fine, but they are not based on reality, on the facts. And he compares the economic system to building a bridge or something that you have to, comply with the laws of, physics before you set up your economic system. The most basic one of those laws is work or starve. And then his reciprocal, relationship is based on production and consumption. Those are the two fundamental economic quantities, production and consumption. And then he goes from there. He starts out with the Robinson Crusoe situation, a person on a deserted island, looks at the economics of that, then gradually complicates things, puts in barter, then he puts in money, and then he puts in employees, and arrives at the fourth stage of the modern economic system, and arrives at a number of different principles. We are in chapter 11 of this book, which is called Production. We started this chapter yesterday, and so we're kind of in the middle of it, middle of it. And if you want to get a better grasp of the reciprocal system as a whole, you want to watch one of my first 474 videos on the subject. If you want to get a better grasp of this economics book, go back about 3 weeks in the archives to where I start at chapter 1 and go through from there. But for now, I'm going to assume that you have some understanding of what we're talking about here, and start here in the middle of chapter 11. The concept of the isolated producer is particularly helpful in bringing out why, as has been stated, the producer has almost complete control over the production market. If we examine the economy of the isolated producer, we find that the total of the payments which he makes for labor and the services of capital, the money purchasing power leaving the production market, necessarily equals the total purchasing power used for buying goods, the money purchasing power entering the goods market. And it also equals the total income of the producer from the sale of goods, the money purchasing power flowing back from the goods market to the production market. These equalities hold good irrespective of the volume of production or the production price, which is principle 6. And it therefore follows that the producer can vary either the price in money or the volume up and down without affecting the ability of the consumer to buy its goods and without affecting the relation of its income to its expenditures. Changes in production volume would have a material effect on the ability of consumers to buy the volume of goods that they want, but that is a different matter that has no bearing on the issues that we are now considering. The composite situation of all producers in an individual enterprise economy when reservoir transactions are in balance is identical with that of the isolated producer in its economy, and the foregoing conclusions are therefore equally applicable to the composite of these producers. Current thought in the economic profession recognizes the ability of the producers to control volume, but regards the establishment of production price as a part of the same process, which determines market price. As explained by Samuelson, the many inputs, quote, the many inputs and output markets are connected in the interdependent system economists call general equilibrium. In this general equilibrium, that's the end of the quote. In this general equilibrium, market prices and production prices, costs in terms of money, mutually determine each other. Wicksell tells us that, quote, the prices of the factors of production are necessarily determined in combination with the prices of commodities in a single system of simultaneous equations. Schumpeter expresses the same point in his statement that, quote, incomes evidently determine prices in the same sense only in which prices determine incomes, end quote. This is a serious mistake, one which has had a highly detrimental effect not only on the actual performance of the economy, but also on the emotional atmosphere in which the dealings between the various segments of the economy are carried on. The fact that this erroneous and costly conclusion is such a direct consequence of the prevailing economic theories that it can be freely characterized as necessary or evident is a clear indication of the fundamental flaws in those current theories. The concept of the circular flow of economic activity, which is orthodox doctrine today, is one of the principal factors that has turned the thinking on the subject of price determination into the wrong channels. In a circular path, there is no beginning and no end. All points along the way are equivalent. If this were a true picture of the economic flow, the viewpoint expressed in the foregoing quotations would be correct. Prices would then determine incomes in the same manner as incomes determine prices, just as the economists contend, and the problem would then be to locate the originating influence. But the mainstream of economic activity is not circular, and hence all conclusions based on the assumed circularity are wrong. As pointed out in Chapter 8, the mainstream of economy always flows in the same economic direction. Irrespective of the type of economic organization in vogue at the moment, this stream is originated by producers, flows to consumers, and passes out of the system at that point. The production market, the market in which the modern producer buys labor and the services of capital, is located ahead of the production process in this main stream, and neither production volume nor production price has been established at the time the market transaction is initiated. The volume of production can therefore be set at any level for which sufficient labor and capital are available, and wages can be set arbitrarily. The price and volume thus established determine the rate of flow of the circulating medium at the production end of the system. If the reservoir transactions are in balance, this is the rate of flow throughout the auxiliary purchasing power circuit. It follows that since the goods market is located downstream of the production process and the reservoirs, both the volume of goods and the flow of money purchasing power have been fixed in advance of the goods market transactions. The average market price is therefore the quotient of two fixed quantities, and it cannot be arbitrarily changed. Temporary and limited price changes can be accomplished by means of reservoir transactions, unless the net total of those transactions is controlled to prevent such changes. Otherwise, market price must conform to production price. In this normal situation, the prices paid by the producer in the production market determine the prices that the consumer must pay in the goods market. In order to get a more detailed picture of the operation of the markets, let us now examine the reaction of the production market to various possible economic changes by means of the general economic equation. If money is withdrawn from a consumer reservoir, increasing the flow to the markets, the initial effect is to draw upon producers' stocks, goods reservoirs, increasing market volume without any change in the market price. And so then he has the equation CB times CV equals P. The increased flow of money purchasing power, CB, passes on to the producer. In case he uses the higher rate of income entirely to increase the volume of production, the production market equation will become the same as the new goods market equation, and equilibrium between the two markets will be reestablished at this higher rate of production without any change in the price level. Some producers, however, will be either unwilling or unable to increase volume. When their inventories get low, they will increase prices and take a larger profit. The goods market in this case becomes CB times V equals CP. The production market follows suit, and the system reaches a new equilibrium at a higher price instead of at a larger volume. As a larger number of producers are involved, with many variations in policies and operating conditions, the actual result in practice will be somewhere between those two limits. If we represent the modifying factors applying to V and P by Y and Z respectively, the final equation for both markets will be CBYV equals ZP. Expressing the foregoing in words instead of symbols, we have principle 10. Any net flow of money from the consumer reservoirs to the purchasing power stream or vice versa causes a corresponding change either in the production volume, the production price, or both. Changes in the producer money reservoirs have the same effect as those involving the consumer reservoirs, except that they act on the production market first and then on the goods market. As already noted, however, these transactions, which have a direct effect on the status of the individual producers, are more subject to intelligent control than the practically blind consumer reservoir transactions. For this reason, withdrawals from the production reservoirs are generally directed toward economically desirable ends, and they constitute a stabilizing factor in the general economy. Unfortunately, from this standpoint, these reservoirs are small compared to the huge consumer reservoirs. The magnitudes of the factors Y and Z depend on the current business situation, varying between the limits of 1 and C. At the bottom of a depression, for instance, when profits are at the vanishing point, or in a sharp decline when producers fear that they will soon disappear, there is no incentive to increase volume. Twice nothing is still nothing. So all of the increase represented by the factor C goes toward bringing profits back to life. Some observers have commented that business cycles swing up and down with a high degree of regularity as long as the downswing does not pass a certain point, just as a ship might roll to a certain extent within the waves. Beyond that point, the ship would capsize and could not be righted again without considerable difficulty. Similarly, it has been noted that when a recession passes a certain point, it becomes a full-fledged depression, and the task of turning the tide is greatly magnified. The foregoing explanation shows why this is true. As long as profits do not fall or threaten to fall below a reasonable minimal level, any improvement in the money flow to the producers is promptly reflected in increased volume as well as in higher prices. But beyond this point, no volume benefit results. Near the top of the upswing, there is plenty of incentive to increase production, but exhaustion of the available labor supply interposes an upper limit. From here on, the factor Y is unity, and the entire force of any increase in money flow relative to the production price must be absorbed in price increases. Sooner or later, the reservoir flow reverses. The money purchasing power flowing to the markets and from there to the producers drops below the equivalent of current production costs. Now there is no longer enough producer income to enable paying the same prices in the production market for the labor and capital services that are required in order to continue production of the same volume of goods. If the producers have available reserves in their money reservoirs that can be used for this purpose, both price and volume may be maintained for a limited period of time in the hope of another reversal of the trend. Unfortunately, these reservoirs are relatively small. They amount to no more than a drop in the bucket if the recession is a sharp one. If the inflow into the consumer reservoirs continues, the time eventually arrives when either production volume or production price must be cut. But most of the components of production price do not want to come down. Rents and interest are extremely resistant to any modification. Wages can be reduced only against very strong pressure for the maintenance of existing levels. Only profits are vulnerable. It is rather ironic, in view of all the criticism that is directed at business profits, that the owners of venture capital are the only participants in the production process who regularly take a cut in their wages in order to maintain the volume of production. The cut is involuntary, of course, but it is nonetheless a reality. Some businesses do attempt to maintain their rate of profit and curtail production as soon as sales drop off, but other producers, by choice or by necessity, conform to the change in the general price level to keep their volume up, and the initial decrease in income is offset principally by a reduction in the rate of profit. Thus, by reason of the non-uniformity in business policies, production price and production volume decrease together in the early stages of the decline, as the flow of money the flow of money to the producers drops. Again, the new equation is CBYV equals ZP. Although a volume reduction is the equivalent of a price reduction from the standpoint of bringing expenditures into line with income, it does not protect profits. In fact, it usually makes matters worse, as reducing volume below the normal level generally raises the cost per unit and thus increases other components of production price at the expense of profits. Furthermore, the new equality between income and expense is only temporary, as the reduction in volume also reduces income. As the recession continues, therefore, profits decrease irrespective of the policies that are followed. And finally, one producer after another reaches the zero profit level. From here on, these producers must either negotiate cuts in some of the other components or they must close their doors. Some, particularly the stronger companies, are able to force wage reductions or even gain concessions from the bondholders or other creditors, but many others are reduced to bankruptcy. The number of business failures increases substantially in every recession and reaches very serious proportions during major declines. Since the competitors are not expanding under these conditions, the failures represent a decrease in production over and above the decreases that are taking place in the volume of goods produced by those enterprises that do manage to survive. The lack of symmetry in the upward and downward swings of the cycle, which concentrates the effects mainly on price in the upswing and mainly on volume in the downswing, is generally recognized by economic observers. Quote, expansions act partly on physical volume and employment and partly on money scales of prices and wages, says J.M. Clark. Quote, contractions owing to the ratchet action of an economy in which wages and prices resist downward movement act more predominantly on the physical volume of production and employment. This is why recessions, even if relatively moderate, always create unemployment under existing conditions where it is not realized that employment can be maintained by purely employment measures independently of the business cycle, which is what Larson talks about in his other book, The Road to Full Employment. While a moderate amount of inflation may not have any material effect on employment, it is important to note that there is no force tending to restore previous conditions after a price or volume change takes place. The economy simply stabilizes at new levels. As has been brought out, the system is stable at any level of production and at any price level, as long as there is no net change in the reservoirs. Hence, if a reservoir withdrawal causes an increase from volume V and price P to volume V or volume YV and price ZP, the system stabilizes at YV and ZP. A return to V and P does not take place unless there is a reservoir input equal in magnitude to the previous withdrawal, or the producers take some voluntary action to change volume or price. It is unlikely that they will increase or decrease production volume except to meet the requirements of the market, but they may have occasion to make voluntary changes in either the production price, that is in wages, or in the market price. The term voluntary refers to changes that are not dictated by market behavior. They may not be entirely free from coercion of some kind. We will now examine the results of such voluntary actions. First, what happens if money wages are increased? It is usually assumed that the increase is secured at the expense of the owners of the business enterprises. This is not correct because, as brought out in the discussion of profits, the cost of the services of capital is determined by factors independent of other business costs. But even if it were true, the wage increase would have no effect on the general economy, except that some purchasing power would be transferred from one group of consumers to another. As all consumers are at the same economic location, neither the price level nor the volume of production would be affected. And that is principle 4. Let me read that last sentence again. As all consumers are at the same economic location, neither the price level nor the volume of production would be affected. Principle 4. Okay, that is the end for today, and hopefully we will be able to finish this chapter when we resume tomorrow. And in the meantime, thanks for tuning in today. Have a great day.